It's interesting to me that there are still live debates about the type of Carl Jung, when it seems so clear to me at the same time that Carl Jung was an INFJ, and he was an INFJ of the truest sort. Now, Carl Jung doesn't necessarily correspond to the quintessential INFJ that we come across in the literature, or at least the online literature. He corresponds to the INFJ that comes across in serious literature, not necessarily the online literature, because he maybe is not such as to have, historically anyway, embodied all that is sort of immediately and obviously painful about INFJ existence, whether in childhood or during your teenage years or into adulthood. He seems to, the image that we have of Carl Jung when we think of Carl Jung is a rather assertive individual. He was quite successful in his career, that, there were already Carl Jung institutes while he was still active, and a very influential thinker, and, he built his own house, and there's many aspects of his life that just, I think, because beyond the fact that he said in an interview that he thought he thought the TI function was instrumental in his personality, which it is. It's just not dominant. There's this image of Carl Jung as somehow like a person who was assertive and successful in many ways. And of course, his character is very complex, and he went through trauma himself. But I think that plays a big role also in making some people reticent to see him as an INFJ, because and I've made a video about Carl Jung's type before, and I had the same opinion at the time, and but it's fine, a little refresh every year or every 2 years I think is beneficial. You need to sort of look at his works. You need to look at his works to realize that that he's not an INTP, because the INTP type is the alternative that's suggested. The fact that Jung identified TI first as the function that defined his personality. Well, first of all, you have to think that there's a reason why therapists have supervisors. There is a reason why, therapists don't provide therapy to themselves. It's impossible to do, and it's never going to work out. It's too obvious to even explain for anyone who's been through therapy. So just because Carl Jung was a great thinker doesn't mean that he was the most objective in analyzing himself. Okay, and I think that with the benefit of hindsight, we can, look at his collected works in toto, and look at his style, look at the way he writes, right? And I think this preoccupation with the definition of terms, precise language, clarity and analysis of the components of language, everything that defines TI is there, but it's not that strong. You would never picture Carl Jung doing the ultimate TI thing, which is to do math, where the precision and systematicity of the components of the language are basically absolute, or and there's no room for doubt. That gives a lot of pleasure to TI dominance, not straight to all TI dominance, of course, but it's impossible to picture Carl Jung as having done that, because his language is often polymorphous and rambly and a little vague. He's not always systematic with his use of terms. Sometimes you're like, okay, you use that particular expression here, the transcendent function, for example, the phrase transcendent function, and then you're reusing it there. It doesn't seem to mean quite the same thing. The collective unconscious has many different ways in which it is defined. He pulls from lots of different sources, and if you like, this analytical cohesion and clarity of Carl Jung's language is not necessarily a strong point. And I think that it's undeniable that when you read his works, that he likes to unpack his thought in long sentences and long paragraphs, and he has this kind of rambly, expansive style that is also very characteristic of NI dominance. Most of them, with some exceptions, which refers to the difficulty that anhedominants actually have with expressing their, you know, their in the innermost core of their ideas, which you see in Jung. You know, he's struggling to articulate what an archetype means, for example, because he sees the importance of it, he sees it in his mind's eye, but it's difficult for him to actually put it to paper, because in a way, the way to articulate an archetype is not really to be done through the transparency of, you know, inscribed reason. And so you see him do a lot of that, get lots of really interesting flashes of insight, inspirations, pulling from different traditions and mythologies, bringing it all into one pattern, seemingly disparate patterns that are brought into one sort of overall kaleidoscopic tapestry that brings a lot of different strands, seemingly alien strands, and make them cohere together as well as he can, but it's never going to be completely convincing, and that's why some people are not convinced. You know, ask yourself also if a TI dominant would come up with the theory of synchronicity. That seems something that only an NI dominant could come up with. In fact, perhaps an NI dominant who's able to shut down their TI a little bit while they're writing about it. You know, so it's really interesting to compare him with Freud also, you know, and Freud is not a TI dominant. However, Freud, I think, is a clear SI user, and you see something in Freud that you see in most any SI users, which is that when they look at the problem, they try to break it down into its more basic components, you know, problem solving done in that way. So in Freud, you have all the neuroses, all the psychoses, all the manifestations in conscious life that can be broken into particular, very sharply defined components of the unconscious that interact in certain ways. It's called the causal mechanistic account in Jung's language. Jung thought that was important, but way too limited, that you needed what he called the finalist conception, which is a conception according to a long-term goal of where the psyche is trying to go. So instead of just really reducing it down to smaller components, it's also about him trying to get a sense of where the psyche is headed, where the archetypes are guiding the psyche, and knowing how to interpret this and responding to this call being part of analytical therapy. Because once you have identified this goal, then you can direct yourself to it. And in a sense, there is some form of cure. Again, you're talking about the goal-orientedness according to a vision that defines NI. And so it's everywhere in Jung. And so I'm still kind of confused to this day as to why there's still so much hesitation. I think a lot of people maybe also just find it difficult to imagine that Jung could be wrong about his own type because, you know, he's the inventor of the model. How could he be wrong? Once you divest yourself of that kind of magical thinking, you open up avenues that you had not seen before, perhaps. Anyway, let me know in the comments what you think, if you agree with me or if you don't. No doubt some people still will disagree. Don't forget, I've written 2 books on the INFJ personality, which is the personality of Carl Jung, as I've argued in this video. The Ecstatic Soul on INFJ consciousness and what happens in the INFJ mind and its existential manifestations. It's a very profound investigation of the type. Check the reviews. And my latest book, The Infinite Soul on INFJ life in the modern world, how to lead a purposeful, rich and fulfilling life in a world that is often hostile to us. The more practical guide, although still quite theoretical, to the Ecstatic Soul. Get these 2 books, give reviews to this one if you haven't yet. And don't forget, the lifeblood of my channel is my Patreon page. You can support me there from $3.50 a month. It really helps me keep the channel going. You can interact with me there. You can suggest videos with your Jung readings and other things. Some bonus content videos to come. So please consider it. It will be super helpful. Okay, see you tomorrow, guys. Bye-bye.